Hello and welcome to the podcast. Jack of all trades, master of none. Today we're talking about frogs. Yay! I love frogs. Just so we're all on the same page, I will be having references in the description in bad APA format, just so you can know where I got my information from. And some of this stuff I already knew, but I found resources on it so that I could be like, here you go. So if you want to take a look yourself, you can just look in the description for those. All right, starting out with the circle of life, or this life cycle of a frog. We're going to start out with eggs. So when they lay their eggs, they kind of lay in this clump, and they're kind of like jelly-like. And it kind of looks like a little thing of sludge from a distance. And that's the little bits of like frog inside of the eggs. They're called frog spawn. And you can kind of tell how old they are based off of like the little dots inside of it, because you can kind of tell when they're starting to turn into tadpoles. But once the eggs hatch, they're going to be considered tadpoles at that point. When they first hatch, they're going to stay close to the water, plants, grass. You know, tadpoles can't survive on land, so they have to stay in the water. And they just kind of eat plants filtered by the water and other vegetation. They kind of get gills pretty early on, so they can breathe underwater and swim around, and it's very fish. It's very much like they're a fish. Now, during this time of them being a tadpole, they kind of grow super rapidly, so eventually they're going to kind of they're going to get external gills. They're going to have hind legs start to grow first, and then they'll get their front legs, and then the tail will start to shorten. When the frog is like almost a frog but just with a tail, that's going to be called a polywog. And I love that word exists. Like polywog, like I go outside and I'm at a pond and I go, oh my, look, it's a polywog, and everyone looks at me like I'm crazy, and it's just a baby frog. Like, I think technically a tadpole from the very beginning is considered a polywog, but I just like saying the word, so I think it's neat. Anyway, so then it'll turn into a young frog. So basically it's just small frog. This is when they start eating bugs, so they're developed enough that they can come out of the water. They can use their tongues to, kind of try and get those bugs and things like that. So they're not going to really eat plants anymore. They might have a little bit of tail left, but not really. It looks more like a bump instead of a tail. And they'll have their fully developed lungs, things like that. So super cool little frog guy. One thing that's really surprising for a lot of people is that it can take up to 4 years for a young frog or froglet to mature into an adult frog. So it takes a long time. People don't realize how long frogs can live. And then at that point, they don't need as much water, and they're going to be able to lay their own eggs again, repeat the cycle, and they're just going to be their beautiful frog selves. So yeah, super cool stuff. The frog life cycle is pretty interesting, and I could get into more depth about it, but I'm not a frog expert. I'm just a frog enthusiast. So, I know what you're all here for. The world's largest frog. So the world's largest frog species is the Goliath frog. It is huge, okay? So the largest species can reach about 14 inches long from snout to vent. So that's just its body, not including its legs. And it can get up to 7.3 pounds, okay? Pounds. That's huge. Okay, so if there's any of my non-American friends listening, that's 35 centimeters and can be up to 3.3 kilograms. So it's a big boy. Its typical habitat range is going to be in Cameroon and Equatorial Guinea. Their numbers are declining just because of habitat destruction and then the pet trade. So people will go capture them and sell them to people, and then also the fact that it's not their habitat it's not just their habitat being destroyed, it's also the habitat of their food, and they are quite large frogs, so they do need a lot of food to maintain that. So that is one of the reasons. One thing that's super interesting about the Goliath frog is that they don't have a vocal sac. so they're not able to like ribbit. They don't make mating calls or anything like that. So like when you hear frogs all the time, they're using their vocal sacs to produce that sound, and the Goliath frogs don't have that. And so I just think that's really interesting. They also are known to build nests and kind of guard their eggs when it's in water. So that's really cool. Good parents, I guess. So on the other side of the scale, we're going to talk about the smallest frog. So the smallest frog in the world is the New Guinea Amu frog. I don't know how to actually pronounce it. So if it's pronounced differently, tell me. So obviously you're going to find it in Papua New Guinea, mostly in the eastern region. So from snout to vent, i.e. just the body, it's going to be 0.30 inches. Okay, so it is literally smaller than a dime. And it is so tiny. It actually at one point used to be considered the world's smallest known vertebrae, because you have to remember, frogs have bones. They're vertebrates. They have bones. So like imagine having bones just that small. Like how do you even, are those strong bones for the size? Like what is happening? Because like it's smaller than a dime. Like if you look up pictures of the frog, it's almost all of the pictures are on a dime for reference. Like it's tiny. Oh, also for the non-American people, that's going to be 7.7 millimeters. So literally freaking tiny. The species was discovered relatively recently in 2009 by Louisiana State University herpetologist Christopher Austin and his PhD student Eric Rittmeyer. While they were on an expedition to kind of explore the biodiversity of Papua New Guinea and document it. So they found it. And then, super interesting, these frogs do have vocal sacs. So they do have calls, and the calls resemble ones made by insects. So it's actually really hard to tell if it's a frog call or if it's just a bug. But I think that's so interesting. But yeah, they're just tiny little dudes. The weight of them is about 0.00035 ounces. Okay, so for non-Americans, it's going to be 10 milligrams. Tiny. And they actually don't have a tadpole stage. So some frogs don't have a tadpole stage. Instead, the species hatch out of their eggs as hoppers, which are just miniature adults because they are so small. So I just think that's really cool. Anyways, I like frogs. Some super cool frog species. There's the hairy frog, also known as the horror frog or the wolverine frog, where they have like a defense mechanism where they kind of break their toe and like shove the bones through their skin like Wolverine, and they kind of do that to like scare the attacking creature away, and also like they can fight with them. It's literally like Wolverine if Wolverine was a frog, like Kermit the Frog here, except he's got freaking claws coming out of his hand. One of my favorites is definitely the tomato frog, because those boys are so rotund. They are round, they are bright red, they are so cutesy, and they just kind of sit there. So I'm a huge fan of those guys. The Australian frogs, what are they called? Hold on. Oh, the Australian tree frogs. Those guys are just so like, they're just little. They're just little guys. There's the Australian green tree frog, which a lot of people have as pets, and they are just like, on God, they are just the like cutest, patootiest little frogs. And like when they're bred in captivity, they can come in different colors other than green, and they are just like, they just sit there in your hand. They're just little pals. I love them so much. Some fun facts about frogs. One, they swallow with their eyes. So like their eyes are kind of out of their head a little bit. When they swallow, their eyes go into the socket and push the food down into the stomach. So that's kind of kooky, super cutesy. You're not ever going to see a frog drinking water because they don't drink water through their mouths. They drink it through their skin. So there's these areas on their belly and the underside of their thighs called a drinking patch where they can absorb water directly through their skin. Also, they can breathe through their skin as well. That's how they're able to hibernate, because they're able to absorb oxygen through their skin. When frogs shed as they grow, they actually eat that skin so that they can have the nutrients from it, so that they're not wasting nutrients, which is super cool. And then I know what everyone's thinking, we're talking about frogs, why aren't we talking about toads? And I hear you want to talk about toads. Toads are frogs, but with accessories, and those accessories are poison glands. So they're called parotid glands, and they're found behind the eyes on the toad. And some frogs and salamanders, in toads, these glands contain different toxins, so like a neurotoxin and stuff like that. And when the toad is really stressed out, it will secrete it, and it's going to look a little milky, a little white. So if you see a frog or a toad with like white, kind of like splotches on them, don't touch them. That is poison. I mean, it's not going to hurt you as much unless it's like a very poisonous species, but it's just you're stressing out that animal. You don't want to mess with it. One thing I do want to say is when you are handling frogs and toads and stuff, because let's face it, if you see a toad, you're going to pick it up. Like, especially if you're in America, like there's not toad species that are going to kill you. But you're going to pick up the toad, right? So if you pick up the toad, that's fine. Be respectful of it. Don't squish it. But like, if you're going to hold it, that's fine. Just try not to hold another toad or like amphibious animal without washing your hands first. And obviously, if you can wash your hands before you pick up the toad, that's ideal. But again, you're not going to like ruin its career because you didn't. It's just more ideal for handling. Or if you have, disposable gloves, that would also be ideal, because their skin is super sensitive, and like they need their skin is super sensitive. It has mucus on it, and like that is their entire thing. That's how they breathe, that's how they drink water. You can really hurt one of those animals by mishandling it, because its skin is just so sensitive. So just keeping that in mind. But yeah, anyways, that's pretty much all I have for you today, and the frogs and the toads. If you want a part 2 of this, let me know, and I'll make another one with more like in-depth stuff. But yeah, pretty much just an overview. Thanks for joining me on the podcast, and here's a word from our sponsor for this episode. Are you tired of having your kids inside all day? Or maybe little Tommy has one too many bullies at school. Whatever the reason, we promise you that this new innovative kids toy will absolutely blow them out of the water. Introducing the new kids toy, Brick. Using only the finest brick materials, this toy will last your family generations. Just imagine little Susie's face when she shatters her first windshield. Or just picture how much fun little Johnny will have with his friends making fires in a safe fire ring made of brick. Get yours now for just 2 payments of $9.99, plus shipping and handling.